Hello and welcome to another episode of Great Britons. It's good to have you along. I do hope you're going to enjoy today's content, and if you do, then please do click the like button. It does make a big difference to us here on the channel. It helps with all those algorithms and all the other IT paraphernalia that surrounds that. So thank you for that. We have got a cracking one for you today, an absolute belter. So let's dig in and talk about a gentleman by the name of Charles Darwin. Now, Charles Darwin was born in the year 1809 and passed away in 1882. So obviously he lived a very full life. Darwin's main sort of claim to fame, I guess, was that back in the day he was the, I don't know, I kind of concerned about saying this, but let's give it a try. He was the David Attenborough of his time. Yeah, I know some people will groan at that one. He knew everything there was to know really about all sorts of animals. He travelled the world whenever he could, writing sort of all sorts of different papers about different species, and he wrote umpteen books and God knows what. He had an absolutely amazing career. And today's episode, I'm calling Darwin versus the Ufologists. Yeah, what about that? If that's an expression you're not familiar with, the ufologists, they don't necessarily all believe in extraterrestrials, but they do believe enough to be well read on the subject, and in particular, various stories about close encounters and all that sort of thing. So this is a view from the ufologists as opposed to Darwin's own view, if you like, how life has really developed since those days of many years ago. His book, The Origin of the Species, is really the one I want to focus on today, because that's the one that covers the main subject that we're talking about, which is Darwin's point of view that man descended from apes. Okay. And how some people, well, after listening to this, you may think twice about whether you accept that story or not. Darwin was from Shrewsbury in the Midlands, and he lived a long and happy life. He was a married man, and he'd got 10 children. And how on earth he found time to write all these books and travel the world and be the expert that he was on the subjects is beyond me. But he obviously he obviously found the time. So bless him. Yeah, he spent a lifetime on research and study of all sorts of creatures. He really did. And he believes, or he believed rather, I should say, that the evolution of various species came about by natural selection and survival of the fittest, and so on and so forth, and that creatures have a tendency to develop to match their surroundings. So there we are. If we think about how any creatures evolve, I mean, yeah, there are kind of subtle changes over the years, but to really look at something very substantial change, you're really looking at thousands of years, over which a species will develop. One of the things I wanted to talk about today was, from research, we know that there was a point in distant history where, in terms of the human skeleton, there was an increase in brain size, and it was a huge increase of about 70%, matched by an increase in the size of the human skull, which, you'd kind of expect that. But here's the weird bit. Obviously, to get from where it was to an increase of 70%, that you would have expected there to be a gradual change, even though it may have been a relatively short span of time. For example, a skull may increase by 5%, 10%, 15, 20, so on and so forth. Now, had that happened, the way in which nature would have changed it, you would have expected to have found skeletons all over the world, all with different sized skulls. Now that simply hasn't happened. I mean, there is no evidence. There is no evidence for it. So we know it happened, but there's no evidence to show that over 2,000 or 3,000 years, the skull gradually became larger. There are also DNA differences. So, as we know, early humans, the Neanderthals, the cavemen, they didn't speak in any kind of grammatical way. Yes, they could grunt to one another. What are you having for dinner, darling? And this kind of way. Some would argue things haven't changed that much, but there you go. But you know what I'm saying. The vocabulary was limited, to say the least, and it certainly was not structured. But again, later DNA evidence shows that there's additional DNA appearing in the human DNA structure that shows additional DNA which is specifically responsible for an improvement in speech. Now, this DNA does not appear in apes and other primates, so straight away we've got a divergence there between, if you like, apes and chimps that developed up to a point, and then that development completely stopped. Another sort of branch of evolution for humans kind of went off and led to us having, hundreds of different languages on the earth. So a massive difference there. Another big change in DNA structure for humans was that DNA has been found which relates specifically to man's ability to reason. So this is problem solving at another level, and the ability to create solutions to those problems. Again, not present in apes and other primates. And the best example I can give for that is if you follow kind of Darwin's theory to the nth degree, then you'd say, well, how come apes can't design and build aircraft? So yeah. So all evidence suggests that the changes relatively quickly, which is why there's no kind of skeletal evidence, if you like, of these changes having occurred. These changes to DNA in particular and man's evolution are often referred to as the divine spark. Now, ufologists in the main believe that well-meaning extraterrestrials who had landed on Earth performed interventions on humans, so that you can make your own mind up as to what their motivation may have been, but I guess the popular theory is that they were well-meaning. They looked at humans and thought that we were not fulfilling our full potential, I guess, in that, we couldn't reason very well, we couldn't speak very well, and so on and so forth. So they purposely made these changes to our DNA structure to enable us to fulfill our potential. Whereas many others feel quite simply this was just God's intervention, that God saw us and thought, well, okay, we can make improvements. And in fact, it was God's intervention that made these changes. However, you're still, regardless of who or what you believe in, and I think it is down to personal choice. I think what's interesting here is that it does appear that an intervention of some kind, whether it be a physical intervention or a divine intervention, did take place. Or you go with the Darwin theory that it just happened over thousands and thousands of years. I wanted to talk now about a thing called Occam's razor. Lovely term that, isn't it? Occam's razor, which is a theory that simply says that if something has occurred and there are several different scenarios about how that might have happened, that the simplest and most straightforward and most believable scenario within that is probably the right one. And as I said, it's a term called Occam's razor. So we're back to that sort of central question, if you like. Leaving aside for a moment who did it, a supreme being or other beings, just visiting Earth. It's either that something sort of miraculous took place. No, it didn't, and it took thousands of years to happen. But as I've said, because of the lack of skeletal evidence, I do tend to share the view of the ufologists on this one. I wanted to finish today with a quote from Darwin, and I know some of you may say, well, hang on a minute, you've read too much into this one. And maybe I have, maybe I haven't. Here's the quote anyway. Darwin says that in the distant future, light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. I'll read that again. In the distant future, light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. I read into that myself, a little bit of self-doubt on the part of Darwin, that he's thinking to himself, hang on a minute, here we are, I don't know, somewhere between 1850 and 1870. We know some things and there's a lot more things that we don't know. So on the basis of what we know, and all things being equal, yeah, it appears that man has developed from apes. Seems reasonable. But I think what he's also saying is, well, hang on a minute, what happens in the future when we know a great deal more about science and all the rest of it, and particularly our knowledge of DNA and everything else? And what he's really saying, I think, there is, in the future, will we still hold the same beliefs? So I think what he's saying is, to the best of our knowledge at the moment, in the mid-1800s, yeah, it looks as though man has been, come from apes, but who knows what the future may say. So yeah, interesting one. I do hope you've enjoyed today's episode. It's been a little bit different and given us all a little something to think about. I certainly enjoyed putting this one together and would welcome your thoughts on it. So that's it for today. So hope you've enjoyed it. Do click the like button if you have. I'll catch up with you very, very soon. So for me, it's bye for now. Bye.